Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Hanging Out with Mike DiMuccio. We are live on November 27th. It's a beautiful Tuesday evening, and I've got a very special guest, doctor, or not doctor, I guess I could call you a doctor, given your credentials that I'm going to be reading off in a second here. I would just as soon put a doctor behind that. Roger Drummer is our guest tonight, Nikken herbalist and nutrition expert. Before we get started, just a few notes here. If you'd like to participate in this conversation, you have a question for Roger or myself, please feel to tweet us on Twitter at Royal Alliance 1. We're also monitoring our Google Plus chat and our Facebook chat. If you've not connected with us, just look for The Royal Alliance and we'll pop right up and you can add us to your circles. You can friend us or tweet us. Anyway, Roger, it's you and I don't have a long history, and so this conversation is going to be more about your history than our history. And but before I get started, I wrote this down because I just thought there's no way I'm going to remember this. Let's see. Roger Drummer, he's a certified Chinese herbalist, certified in shiatsu, pranic healing, Reiki master, a Hatha yoga practitioner. Your private clients include Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, Jason Scott Lee, David Carradine, Tom Selleck, Ron Woods of the Rolling Stones. You're an immune system expert, author, educator, public speaker, triathlete, and cyclist. Holy smokes, we need a show just to read off these credentials. That's impressive, Roger, but I'm sure the listeners want to know where all of this got started. And for me, I just want to recant how you and I first met. I'd heard of you, I'd heard your name circulating in the Nikken circles. People have a lot of respect for you. You have a way of making things simple and understandable for the layperson, even though your background is as sophisticated as it is, and you have a huge comprehension of what you're talking about and what the Nikken products really are all about. I first heard you speak in Russia. Today, we shared the stage together this past May in Russia. And I was so blown away by what you had to say. They were launching the Siaga, if I'm not mistaken, in Russia. And I was so blown away by what you had to say about Siaga. And I'm already on Siaga. I just felt, I got to get everybody on Siaga. That's how little I really understood as a Royal Diamond and how much more I could appreciate what that product could do for me and others. And you also mentioned something we'll get to maybe a little bit later in the convention. Your convention talk was brilliant. It's available on YouTube. If you go to the Nikken headquarters channel, it was a fantastic talk. And I know we spoke, and you didn't have notes. I don't even think you knew what you were going to talk about until you actually got on stage. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right. And I was actually surprised that they wanted me to give them my notes before I went on, because I never have notes on anything.
Wow, and yet it came off so effortlessly and yet so succinct. So I want to see if we can do a couple of things here. One of which is, of course, to extract from you the basis of the Nikken product line in terms of its benefits for others, what we really need to know. But even before we get into that, I want to know a little bit about you, and I think our audience might want to know a little bit about you. And how did you get started in this long chain of expertise?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that everything you ran off, all of it happened to me by accident. And so that kind of tells you how I got started in the health field. I had moved from Ohio to Arizona, and I basically didn't have much money. So I answered an ad. If you can imagine, this was 30 years ago when I was much younger. I answered an ad in the newspaper to make sandwiches in a deli for 15 hours a week. And I thought, well, I've been in town 3 days. I'll make sandwiches, have something to eat, and look for a real job when I'm not there, right? So I went in, and it turned out to be a deli in a new health food store that was 15,000 square feet. And they had just hired this beautiful woman to make sandwiches. So they made me the assistant manager. And so, here I am now. I'm in a health food store, never really been in one before. And I had to learn everything in the store because now I was the guy that was ordering the entire stock for the store and doing everything. So that's how I got into the health field. And I ended up becoming a nutritionist and being trained at-home studies and going to the local university just so I could keep up and be an expert in the store. And everything just kind of snowballed from there. I had literally 10 or 11 years later, I ended up in California, and I went into an herb shop because at that time I was doing triathlons for years, and I wore myself out and had chronic fatigue. So I wandered into this herb shop and became an apprentice and learned Chinese herbology. And that's where I met Mel Gibson and all these other people. Mel, you're going to laugh, Mel was my first official consultation with any human being. I had done a lot of them, but I had never scheduled one where they actually scheduled and I was the person that they scheduled with. He was the first guy I went in and had an official appointment with.
Okay,
so that's how everything kind of snowballed.
I gotta ask, is he as crazy off camera as he is on camera?
I have to tell you, Mel was probably one of the nicest people I've ever talked to in my whole time I did consultations. He was very guarded at first because he's very famous, right? But he's really, when I knew him, he was really a nice guy. The guy would, if he told you he was going to be in an appointment at 11 o'clock, he was there at 10:59. He would pull up at the door and walk in exactly at 11 o'clock, and he'd come into his appointment. And get this, one time I asked him if he could give me an autograph for my niece in Pennsylvania, right? And I told him her name. 2 weeks later, he comes back for another appointment, and at the end of our session, I hadn't even remembered it, right? He pulls out a picture and he goes, "This is for," and he said her name, wrote it right out and handed it to me. He had remembered her name from 2 weeks before.
Wow, that's cool.
And he was telling me childhood stories after a while. He was always just a great guy.
That's nice to hear. And I appreciate that. You know, you would probably know him better than most, and it helps dispel some of the stuff that, you know, we get fed by the media and whatnot. Anyway, on to our discussion of health. Now, like I said, your talk in San Diego this past convention or leadership conference was really, really so effortless and smooth because you gave us a really good understanding fundamentally, not just about nutrition, but you see the bigger picture. I know you see the whole concept of the wellness home and so forth. So well, first of all, how long ago did you first get involved with Nikken, and what drew you to this company?
I got involved around the year 2000, actually. And that, in fact, if you can look back and see when they launched the immunity product, that's when I got involved. Because in the original contracts that they wrote up with Nikken, the farm that grew that mushroom product had to supply a speaker for Nikken to go out and educate people. And so my friend actually ran the farm, and he called me up and he goes, "Roger, there's nobody here. We're scared to death to go out and talk. Would you do it?" And so I became part of that project, and that's how I met Nikken, actually. And it was very fascinating to me because in my whole training with herbs, we had always used extracted herbs and nothing but. My teacher had always told me that those are the only ones to use. You can't use mycelium and those things, and that they won't work, right? And then I'm going out to give a talk for Nikken, and they're all mycelium mushrooms, right? And I'm thinking, oh, how am I going to do this? Is it affecting my integrity, right? Because he taught me this, and this is something else. And after about 3 months, I had more testimonials about those things working better than anything I had in the store. I had never seen, literally after a year, I had hundreds of people that had testimonials and even showing me scars where things disappeared. That it was one of the greatest eye-opening things for me in being an herbalist at that time.
You picked one of my favorite products as far as the nutritionals go, the immunity. I travel with it because it literally is a lifesaver for me. When you're doing a lot of traveling, you're running at both ends, you know, burning the candle at both ends, and on planes and whatnot, you can be very susceptible, and usually you start to pick up the sniffles, and I pound down usually about 4 or 5 of those at a time, the mushroom capsules, and usually about 2 to 3 times a day for a day or two, and it just seems to stop everying in its tracks.
It does, yeah.
What's your understanding of that product? Like, why is it so important?
I can tell you why it's so good in the first place is that the farm that grows that has a special technique by which it's a longer growing process. They add certain condensed forms of plant extracts to the rice when they grow it, and it raises the amount of active ingredient in it really high. In fact, it's higher than a lot of extracted herbs. And so that's one thing it has going for it. The other thing is that it has a lot of mushrooms in it that are not just straight immune system, but there's quite a few mushrooms that are also antiviral, antibacterial, all these things. And that's why it works so well as a preventative, and also as when you're starting to catch something, you can seem like you take a lot and it just kicks it back out, because it has a broad range of activity. It's probably, I think it's one of the most powerful mushroom formulas I've ever seen.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure you now know pretty much a lot of the Nikken products, and you've traveled the world of Nikken and delivering talks here and there. Do you have a favorite Nikken nutritional product?
A favorite nutritional product? I love the progesterol.
Now, let's talk about that, because you said something that was quite startling to a lot of us in the audience when you said, you know, there are double-blind studies that prove the statements that you were making with respect to their health benefits concerning heart disease. Could you maybe touch on some of that?
I will. You know that the active ingredient in progesterol is citrus bergamot riso, and that ingredient from the specific source where Nikken gets theirs has actually been put through a clinical trial, and it's got structure and function claims that you can actually use. And what's fascinating about it is that it has a better result on cholesterol than any drug that's ever been put through a clinical trial. It's raised the HDL, the beneficial cholesterol, better than any drug. It's lowered the LDL, the one they consider to be bad for you, better than any drug on the market. And the other interesting thing is that it actually has an effect in that same clinical trial of lowering blood sugar by 20%, lowering blood pressure by about 20%. It's just across the board, it had an effect on just about everything that you could say is a major factor in heart disease.
Wow, that's impressive. So I guess you feel pretty confident when you go out and talk about that product.
No, you know, the interesting thing about that product was when it was launched, I was in Austin, Texas, and it was just maybe 3 or 4 weeks after it hit the market. And I had 3 people in that room come up to me that had blood pressure issues for 30 years. And they had taken progesterol just for their cholesterol, and 10 days later their blood pressure was normal. And they all were wondering what happened to them, right? And I told them in the room that I have been in the health field since 1981, and that I've never seen a natural product actually regulate somebody's blood pressure, ever. And I was like shocked by it, right? And I had read the clinical studies and kind of glossed over that thing about blood pressure, and it was happening all the time, and I see it happen all the time. People regulate their blood pressure.
You know, I've been in this company for 21 years, Roger, and I have rarely seen or heard this kind of intimate knowledge of our products. I mean, I've done really well as a business model, and I've done well promoting the concepts in a more general way. You know, we know that nutrition is good for us, and we know that we need to sleep more, etc. But when you hear this kind of information, it takes it to a whole new level for me, specifically for me, and I'm sure for anybody watching, because not that I feel like I need to know all that much more. It just makes me feel like what we have is even more relevant and more important than we've imagined. You know, I know you have an appreciation for all of the Nikken products and the whole Nikken story, I guess. And since you came in around 2000, that's when the Nikken Wellness Home sort of started to make its way into our consciousness. Maybe just back up for a second and give us that big outlook that you have, since you've really witnessed so much in Nikken. What's different about Nikken? Because you could be with other, you know, companies that purely focus on nutrition,
Right.
But here's something that's a bit broader. A bit, you know, like, tell me what your perspective is on Nikken, the whole concept.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, you know, you've been in it for a long time and build a business, and you don't really know intimately all the products. Well, I have to admit, in the first probably 7 or 8 years, I was only intimate with a few things that I was always talking about. And And with anybody that gets in the health field, by the way, you don't learn everything overnight, and the greatest thing you could ever do is just admit you'll never know it all, and then you're going to learn something all the time. And the reality is, it's only in the last 4 or 5 years that I truly got an insight into what's actually determines your health and what actually makes a difference on everything. Because, the whole nutrition world is all built up, and they talk about nutrition like it's drugs, right? This one's for that, this one's for that, and this does, it's all these different things, and you think you got to buy 25 different things. The reality is that all health is based on homeostasis. Your body has a certain rhythm that it has to be in all the time to make it healthy. Every nutritional product you take fills a gap in that, but not very many of them actually establish your body's rhythm. And the whole thing about the Nikken Home is that it's based on a few things. And this is what makes Nikken really unique in my mind, and it took me a long time to figure it out. But if you notice, and you'll notice after this call, because you're going to start looking around at things, nobody actually tries to establish the body's natural rhythm. They're all selling things that are for one particular thing or the other. But Nikken, because it's based on magnetic energy, right? Energy fields that you get through the water, you get it through the sleep system, you get it through your shoes. It's just really reconnecting you to the Earth's energy. And it's based on, it's got a light product, right? Natural wavelengths of light. All these different things. In fact, the light and the magnetics and sleep are the 3 main things that your body has to have to establish homeostasis. It's natural rhythm. And if it doesn't have it, it's like trying to establish your health by missing 20% of what you actually need. You'll never have that 20% through nutrition. You'll never get it through drinking. You'll never get it through anything, because man evolved living, walking, sleeping, everything on the planet Earth. And every cell in his body evolved for millions of years in relationship to the magnetic energy of the Earth. And if it's not there, if you're not somehow connected to it, it's like a cell phone that's half juiced. It needs to be replugged every night. Well, when you lay down on the mattresses, when you're having the insoles in your shoes, when you're having exposure to that all the time, every cell in your body works differently. It's like the one thing that creates this special energy called Zeta Potential. I don't know if you've heard that before. There's something called Zeta Potential, which means that when your cells are at the proper voltage, they repel each other. They move away from each other.
I've not heard that. That's cool.
It's called Zeta Potential. I think it's ZITA. And when you don't have it, they all clump up. Well, what is a major part of every bit of heart disease? It doesn't matter what they want to label it. High blood pressure. Now it's a big thing to say your blood is lost its viscosity, right? And they talk about all these things. What they're actually talking about is your cells are clumping together, and they have more of a tendency to clot, right, and to have a problem. Well, that Zeta Potential is based on a lot of things, hydration, nutrition, but it's based on magnetic energy. It's based on having the right voltage so that they all repel. There's research that shows that if you take a blood sample and look at it under a live scope, and then you take somebody out and stand them on the ground for 30 minutes, take another blood sample, it looks completely different. What has happened? All the cells move away from each other, and they're all flowing around like they're supposed to, because they connected to magnetic energy. They recharge. So the Nikken Home, it's the only thing, if you look out in the health world, it's the only idea that now you're fully in an environment where you're either got it in your shoes, so it's in your home, you're sleeping in it, right? Which is the best way to kind of get full benefit, because it allows your body to relax enough to shut off the stress response, right? Which is a huge thing. And then it's connected in your water, because, thousands of years ago, for millions of years, all your water was magnetically charged. This is the big thing with a waterfall that nobody ever talks about. It's great that the water is a high pH, and it's great that it has mineral in it, but it's the magnetic energy that is attached to it that changes the zeta potential of the molecules of the water so they don't clump together. So that when it goes into your body, it actually is easier to go into all your cells. And the same thing is happening when you're sleeping on a bed, you're putting your feet in the soles. All these things are happening, and that is what's needed for that little, you know, I don't know the exact number, 10 to 20% of your health that allows it to easily go into homeostasis. And so the whole Nikken home idea is just, there's nothing else like it. You're basically in a cocoon of energy. And then not only that, you're exposed to it so much all the time that you don't forget about it. You go out in the world and you notice when you're not connected, or you notice when you drink terrible water, or you notice when the air is really bad, because you become aware that it's different at home. And that's where you spend most of your time.
You know, it's fascinating hearing you because you're giving me information I've never heard. This is the first time I've heard of this. I've understood the clumping or the declumping. There's been these blood samples, and it's demonstrated that when you pass them through a magnetic field, they get all lined up and organized and flow really nicely through. So these are things I've understood. I've understood the potential voltage across nerve membranes, hence there's a lot of people who suffer from nerve problems that have experienced benefits. For instance, they have increased sensation in their feet and hands, their extremities, and so forth, things like that. But here we are. You know, I'm talking to a nutrition expert, and you're really jazzed up about the magnetics and the environmental issues, because I guess it's true that even the best nutrition in the world is not going to help you if you don't have the electrical system working properly.
It'll help you to a certain point, but it won't be the end-all be-all. You know, it's the human body requires a lot of things, but it requires less of it when it's in an environment where it easily regulates itself. And that's all homeostasis is, an internal regulation where everything works better. And then when you plug, once you establish, it's almost like a baseline. You have the magnetics in your life, you're drinking good water, you're eating better. You add nutritional products to it, then they all work better because there's not so much work for that particular product to actually do. You know, I get this people call me about progesterone. You know, I took it for a month and my cholesterol didn't change, right? And then the first guy that told me that said, well, he was drinking a 12-pack of beer every day, right? But whenever I talk to those people, what you find out is they have so many other things they do that product cannot fight it all. You know what I mean? And the number one thing is sugar. You have to remove your sugar addiction, and then everything starts to work better, because it creates such a certain amount of chaos in your body to homeostasis that it's using everything it can just to offset one thing you put in your system every single day.
Let me just I want to go on with that, because I have kids, and I know how big an issue this has always been for me where they're concerned. I just want to mention again that if you'd like to ask a question of Roger or myself, you can tweet us at Royal Alliance 1. You can send us a post at our Google page or Google Plus page, or on Facebook. We're monitoring all of those, and we'd be glad to take your questions. I do have one that I'm going to bring up in a second here, but let's touch on this sugar thing, because it's probably one of the biggest. I read somewhere that the average North American today consumes 135 pounds of sugar per person per year, and at the turn of the century, first of the 1900s, that was about 5 pounds per person per year. So we've become, sugarholics, and it's obviously had an effect. What would you say would be a real serious concern where sugar is involved?
Well, sugar is a huge issue, and it's probably the worst. Let's just say the most beneficial thing you could do for yourself if you just wanted to start tomorrow is to stop eating sugar. I mean, 135 pounds, they actually have said that thousands and thousands of years ago, the average human had about 22 grams of sugar a year or so. Think about that. Wow. Now you can buy that in a can of tea, right? And this is the problem. And you know, I've thought about this issue for a long time, because I grew up with a lot of sugar and foods and things, but I didn't have access every day to drinking a half gallon of liquid with sugar in it. You know, if I had a soda pop, it was 2 or 3 times a week as a treat, right? Now today, people average 6 or 7 of them a day. And you go into a store, you get a little can of what you think is an energy drink. It's got 40 grams of sugar in it. So an average person, on top of the sugar that they don't know about in their food, is drinking 60 to 80 grams of sugar. That's just an overload, which just kills your system. And you're going to end up obese, or you're going to end up with diabetes. You're going to end up with something from that. But if you can just regulate the drinks that you have with sugar in it, and then just work on obvious things in your diet that you don't want with sugar, the other stuff is really not going to harm you a whole lot. It's the ones that you're not conscious about with the drinks and all those things where you're adding an extra 100 grams of stuff that really you didn't even need to have at all.
Well, Graham Scarden is asking us from our Google Plus platform, if you are removing sugar, then how do you bake?
Well, if you're baking your own stuff, you can use some sugar. It's a very easy way to actually cut it in half, is to use a little bit of stevia. You know, when you're first trying out, I would never bake something with just stevia in it. And stevia is a little tricky to play with, but once you learn it, you can easily take a half to begin with and add a little stevia, so you have half as much sugar. You can even get it down to where you use a third of the amount of sugar. It just depends on how you've trained your taste buds with sugar. And if you're still in the addictive phase of eating it, it's not going to taste very good to you. But if you've trained your taste buds and actually changed your brain energy, sugar becomes less appealing to you. And I can hardly eat anything today that's really sweet, just because of the diet that I'm on. I don't have a craving for it. But as you ease into it, you can replace it with stevia. You can use xylitol as a replacement for it.
But you did say something really relevant there, and that is that it's not necessarily a process that happens overnight. Disease doesn't happen overnight. It's something that we got to grow into the habit of. You've trained your taste buds differently than the average person. By the way, I'm the same. I don't take milk or sugar in coffee. If I'm going to have coffee, it's going to be black, as well with tea and so forth. So it's really a question. So being in health, and particularly, I mean, that's been your life for a greater part of your adult life. You just started to change the habits that were maybe society was pushing certain habits on you, but you've sort of steered away and gone to a more natural solution. You know, maybe just speak to that about, because there's people are joining Nikken, people are involved in Nikken, and they're looking for the products to do it all, kind of like the magic bullet.
Right.
But Nikken is an experience. It's a journey. It's humans being more is not an event.
Right. Well, with sugar, you know, when I got into the health field, even the first 10 years that I was eating healthy, I was still addicted to sugar. I just didn't know it. I was buying all these baked things that had natural sugar in it and buying all this stuff and always getting wigged out and my eyes were so tired, I always wanted to fall asleep. And I realized one day, one of the great turning points for me was learning about brain chemistry and neurotransmitters, and it's become kind of a hobby with me. But you find out that cravings for sweets is actually a signal that your brain's missing something. So when you give it to your brain, it goes away. And it's so fascinating to me. In just even the last 6 months, I probably randomly got in a conversation with 20 people. They all go, I'm addicted to sugar. What do I do? And I'll tell them to eat a certain breakfast for 7 days, and it's gone. They lose their addiction to sugar. Wow. 7 days. And they're always laughing at me when I tell them, because I'm a vegetarian, and I always tell them to just eat meat for breakfast. And they look at me like shocked, right? But here's the thing, and you don't always have to do it, but most people eat meat anyway, right? So I say just wake up in the morning for 7 days, eat nothing for breakfast, but either a chicken breast or 2 chicken breasts if you want it. I don't care how much you eat. Or a hamburger with no bread, no nothing on it, right? Nothing for breakfast but that, and you can eat anything you want, you know, that's reasonable, healthy 2 hours later, right? Or if you have a protein powder with no sugar in it at all, you could drink that with water, right? I don't want anything but protein going in your system. And when you do that, so you wake up, your brain wants to make dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that powers your brain up, just like booting up a computer. And when you eat protein, what your body does is it takes a certain amino acid called tyrosine out of the protein, goes up to your brain, it turns on dopamine. Dopamine controls your cravings for sweets, and it boots your brain up. And so you're alert, your brain's turned on fully, and you don't crave sugar almost from the first day. So when you get hungry, it's not that type of hunger where you're going, I've got to have a cookie, and you're reaching for all those things you got around the house and you're snacking all the time. No, you feel hungry, but your brain's up. The difference is, and this is one of the keys to health problems, it's even one of the keys to depression. People often start with a carbohydrate breakfast with a bunch of sugar in it, right? Even though they don't think they're eating sugar, they're eating white bread, they're eating a bagel, they're having coffee with sugar. It's mostly sugar, right? Your body turns it all to sugar. And what does it want your brain do with that? It makes serotonin, right? Serotonin makes you relaxed. After about 2 hours, you want to take a nap. You get kind of drowsy. You get kind of like this. So what do? You eat more sugar. And, it's a false way of stimulating dopamine. You feel a little high at first, but then you're going to crash. And here's the funny thing about that. And think about how this ties into everybody in North America. When you eat too much sugar continuously, you make too much serotonin. You know what the main symptom of having too much serotonin is? It's anxiety. And when you have too much serotonin, your homeostasis kicks in and gets rid of almost all of it. And know what you're left with then? Anxiety. It's the same. It's the same symptom. If you have too little serotonin or too much, you get anxiety. So when you take things like Prozac or Zoloft, what it actually does is stabilizes it somewhere in the middle, so it's not too high or too low, so you feel a little bit relaxed. But the reality is the whole problem is mostly sugar.
Now, how about the Nikken shake? Do you feel that would be a good choice for people who are looking to stabilize their sugar intake?
I think it's a good one if you establish that first 7 days of just pure protein, because there's a little bit of sweetener in that. And I like, with most people, they have so much sugar in their diet, I like them to just do something for 7 days with nothing in it but straight protein. And after that, your next meal could be protein and any vegetable you want, have some fruit. But you'll notice, and I've done this with tons of people, 7 days they all go, I don't have cravings anymore. I'm just,
Wow. Isn't the body amazing that it can respond that quickly?
And I'll tell you, once you do that for a while, you don't taste sweets the same way. You enjoy them in the evening if you have one, but you start to notice they're too sweet, and you start to cut back on them naturally, and they don't, after a while, they don't become an issue in your life at all.
Great, great, great advice. We got a couple of questions. One here is from Nikolina Tienev. She's on Google+. She asks, does raw honey count as sugar?
It does, yes.
You
want to limit that, yeah. It's any sugar.
Well, what about sugars that we find in fruit? Naturally occurring like that. Same thing?
Well, that one for the first week, you want to limit that too, because you've been eating way too much sugar. But after a week or so, you can easily eat a few pieces of fruit.
So you just want to shock the system back into a normal way of acting.
Yeah, you're kind of almost going on a diabetic diet for a little bit of time. It's just like with diabetes. People don't realize that 90% of the people that have diabetes could change it in 30 days and just be out of it. If they just change their sugar cravings, the same way I was talking about earlier.
And that would include pasta, I would imagine, because my dad, he's a big fan of pasta.
Yeah, but you know what? That would only mean for about a month you take a bunch of stuff out, and then you actually start adding back in. Once you remove most of the dangerous stuff, a lot of the stuff that's kind of on the border doesn't really affect you that much. It's just that you've allowed yourself to go so far out of the extreme with too many things that just have no business in your diet anyway, that now you can't handle the things that wouldn't be bad for you if you were healthier.
Oh, that's an interesting point. We've got another question. This is from Tommy Celsus on Google+. He asks, any tips on how to present Nikken as a holistic solution to any of your patients' problems? He's a healthcare practitioner, so he's looking to how do you address this from a holistic solution we're a patient, client-patient, I guess.
Well, you know, I would always establish something around magnetics and water first, as opposed to trying to push just one nutritional thing. Unless they had a lot of issues with being sick all the time, you might want to go with the immunity or something. Or if they have a specific thing, I tell everybody, it doesn't matter who you run into, they need to take some progesterol for a while, right? Because everybody has heart disease to some extent. But it's still, in Nikken, you're the only company that has the type of water we sell and the only one that has an idea about magnetics. And so it's a unique field. And again, it establishes something, and try to make an impression to them that you're going to create an environment by where your body actually works better so that it can make better use of whatever else you do. In other words, the nutritional products you take after a month of being exposed to magnetic water and standing on the insoles even in a sleep system will work completely different. But you have to establish the body's ability to regulate itself, and you do that best through exposure to magnetics and to magnetized water.
Phenomenal. Any other nutritional products kind of jump out at you that Nikken has?
You know, I love the whole idea about Siaga, and one of the reasons I love it is because most people rarely eat the type of food that's in it, which is berries. Berries have a very unique antioxidant profile that you can't get out of other foods, and it's the easiest product to get into kids because kids love the taste of it, even if it's straight. And you could pour it into anything else they're drinking, or you can put it in a shake, and they get the benefit of it without any objections to it at all. And for kids, again, kids, it's almost like a third of their diet you have no hope over, right? It's the other 2/3 that you just want to make sure they get some good stuff and they're drinking clean water, and you add some Siaga, maybe some jade greenzymes or something they're eating, and kind of call it a day. It's kind of like you can't be so strict with a kid that they just get turned off to everything. So, you know, that's one of the reasons I love Siaga a lot, is that kids find it very, very good. They just love the taste of it, and it's easy to get into them.
I'm glad you brought up kids, because at the convention you said on stage that you felt that Nikken's affiliation with Healthy Child, Healthy World was one of the best things we had going. Would you just maybe share your feelings about that?
Well, yeah, the reason for that is because by thinking about the health of children, you touch an emotional place in most people, right? Everybody wants their kids to have the best of everything. They want their kids to have, you know, the best schools, the best clothes, everything of growing up, right? But for a lot of parents, they won't pay attention so much to everything they're doing for themselves, but they will for their kids. When they find out that the environment and the pesticides and the bad air and all these things are totally damaging kids, and it has such a greater impact on kids, like pesticides, for instance. Children don't develop the same detoxing enzymes in their body till they're 12 or 14 years old that an adult has. So pesticides are much worse for kids. The chemicals that they spray on your food, chemicals in the air, the body just doesn't break it down the same, right? So parents, by becoming aware of what they're doing for their kids, will learn so much more about the environment and everything, and start to change their own lives. But the kids might be the one thing that gets them involved and gets them to say, hey, I have to start doing something because I'm hurting my children. And for example, I'm going to tell you something. I lived in LA for 15 years. And when I was there was this one group that publishes a study about every 2 years in LA. And every 2 years, since the 50s, I think they've done this, they've said that they can measure noticeable lung damage in children by the time they're 5 years old in LA, just from the air. They have noticeable lung damage that you can measure just growing up in LA. So think about that in terms of what the environment does to kids. And they're not even talking yet about the food that they're eating. They're just talking about going outside, breathing air.
Wow. Well, you got some attention here, so let's just answer these questions. Antonio Raimundo on Google Plus asks, how is agave as a sugar substitute?
Agave is still a fructose-based sweetener, and it's probably better than just straight, fructose sugar, but it's one of those things where you have to limit it. And here, and this is a really interesting issue with sugars, in that people get really radical now that all the information come out on fructose and high fructose corn syrup and all that stuff. But you know what? It doesn't matter how bad the sweetener is. If you don't eat a lot of it, it doesn't do anything to you.
Right.
See, it's the overconsumption of all of them. No, agave, it is high in fructose, but if you used it in a regulated manner where you weren't taking 50 grams of it a day, then it doesn't really do anything to you. But so if you put a tablespoon of it on your pancakes once in a while, or you put a teaspoon in your tea, and if you're someone who doesn't drink soda pop or buy sweetened drinks, it's not going to do anything to you. But if you're someone who eats poorly and you've got another 100 some grams of sugar that day, it's like poison.
Wow. Let's see. Eileen Pusey on Facebook asks, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your names right. Are just eggs okay for breakfast those first 7 days?
I would not use eggs as the main protein for the first 7 days, because eggs are a lot of fat, and even though it's good fat, it's not a straight protein food. It's fine after the 7 days to use them once in a while as your protein thing, but I would either do the straight meat, a protein powder with no sweetener in it at all.
Okay.
I know for vegetarians that's hard, but
let me get a little bit more behind the scenes here, and who is Roger Drummer? I mean, we got a little bit of your background in terms of health and whatnot, but what really drives you? You've moved from California. I guess you're now, whereabouts are you now?
I live in Ohio.
Ohio, okay. So very big difference between the West Coast. What's your passion? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What drives you to continue the work that you're doing? I know, for me, it's easy to talk as a Royal Diamond. I get to travel. I get to talk in front of people. I help people change their lives and so forth. And I guess in a lot of parallels, you're doing that from a consultant standpoint. But just in your own words, what is it? Who is Roger Drummer? What have you become these days?
I realized about 10 years ago that one of my gifts was actually teaching people things in a way that they understood complex issues. And it came to me, about 10 years ago, and I get this comment all the time that it now makes sense to me that I heard you talk, or, you explain things in a way that I actually understood it. And that's just a gift that I have. And that's one of the things that I love doing and why I'm still involved going out and giving talks all the time. But the other thing is I love herbs. Herbs have changed my life, and I've got a patent now in growing mushrooms, and I'm having some things tested with a university here soon on, to kind of just see the level of activity in different immune system things. It's just a passion of mine. And I'm also very interested in brain diseases. Alzheimer's has become a huge issue in the world, and it's becoming an epidemic. And it's something I kind of got into by accident, like most things I do. But I'm very interested in Alzheimer's, and I think most people are missing the boat on what they're doing to treat it. And I actually just started a small clinical trial with something I created for Alzheimer's. So that's one of the things that really excites me. And I think there's a way of actually dealing with most people that have it to improve their quality of life that everybody's overlooking. And that's one of the things that excites me the most, actually.
Barbara Bertucci asked us or made a comment on our Google Plus as well with respect to your knowledge about mushrooms and their effect on tumors as a reducer. Have you got some background on that?
Well, if you just take a bottle of Nikken's Immunity, right, and if you go to the website PubMed, which is the government's website for all medical issues, and looked up any of the mushrooms on that formula, you'll find about at least 400 research papers on immune system, tumors, cancer, and mushrooms that you can download and at least read the abstracts on. So it is true that most of the mushrooms in that have been tested medicinally for not only boosting immunity, but for getting rid of tumors. But they don't recognize most of that research in the U.S. It's more of a thing in China and Japan and Europe. And in fact, there's two mushrooms in the immunity formula that were used and used to be the #1 and #2 treatment worldwide for cancer, and that's Trametes and shiitake. They made a medicine out of both of them, and for 20 years they were the #1 treatment in the world for cancer. Now they're like, I think, #3 and #4 because they discovered Taxol and another drug. But that's how widely they're used, and they're used all over the world for getting rid of tumors and treating things like that. But in the U.S., they do not recognize that because it's the U.S.'s strategy on cancer doesn't have anything to do with the immune system. It has to do with poisoning and trying to kill it that way. So it's a different strategy.
Wow. Well, as a person who's into natural remedies, I'm sure it's not your first choice. Okay, so I want to get maybe a little bit back to the Nikken story because it's different from my perspective than it is from yours. You work indirectly with a company as a consultant, right. Different than as a business builder. You're not in the business of building a Nikken network, but you see us in the field. You're out there in the field. What do you glean from that? What do you love about what you see when you're out and about and meeting people in the Nikken world and where we're coming from?
Well, what I like about it, and what I've always liked about that type of industry, when from the first time I got into it, was that it not only was a place where people could learn something. You have a meeting and people generally will learn something. They'll learn something about nutrition, they'll learn something about health, and they'll learn something about business, right? And I always, when I first got in it, thought it was a little odd that it was a combination of it. But then I realized that so many people there were making great livings, and even if they were at the bottom level, they were doing something that they enjoyed, and it prevented them from having to take a job that you just absolutely hated. And I see that as such an amazing thing when you realize it. And in fact, one of the first meetings I was ever at with another company 15 years ago, this lady explained it to me one time. We were at their house, and there was like 15 women there having a tea party, and I was giving a presentation. And she goes, "Oh yeah, we all used to have these terrible jobs we hated. Now we just get together and we have fun, right? And we supplement our income, right?" And I thought, wow, what a great business model to get into, But when I go to meetings, I love the fact that people are learning something, and the health field is not, being healthy is not just learning a lot about health and taking a lot of great things. Being healthy is getting out and mingling with people, broadening your arena of friends, so to speak. And besides that, when you're in a room like that, you have 50 people now that you can actually call up and ask questions of and learn things from, right? And then, but also being healthy is thriving economically, being able to put yourself out in the world and do the things you enjoy to do and have the income and things like that to actually go out and do what you want to do. So it's kind of a unique business model in that you can have all those different layers happening all at once. And you can get out of it whatever you want.
Now, I'm sure you've had some pretty interesting experiences either in the field working with us or even before us. I'm wondering if you have any kind of interesting, crazy kind of story. Do you have maybe one of those for us?
No, I don't have a lot of crazy stories. It's interesting with Nikken is that there's not a lot of craziness going on at different things. I mean, there's some funny things that happen, but I tend to always be at meetings where I just meet a lot of interesting people. And I went all over Europe last spring, and I was in Russia, and it was just fascinating to me how the level of quality of people that I met and how much fun it was, and it didn't matter where I went.
How about stories? How about product stories? Have you heard any? What maybe one of the more dominant, just wow stories where the products are concerned?
Well, lately, some of the best ones have always been the lowering blood pressure with progesterol. But I've been for years hearing these types of stories where someone will get up and they'll cry for, they'll start to tell their story and they'll start crying, and they'll talk about how they've been to doctors 4 or 5 times and nobody understood them. Nobody could figure out what's wrong with them. And somebody in an elevator gave them a little mattress to lay on, and they slept for 3 days and it went away, right? And they can't figure out what that is. And believe me, you know what that is? That's basically their body actually relaxed enough to shut off the stress response, and homeostasis started to come back. And what they had was just an imbalance of something. But it changes, and those types of stories are amazing to me. But I've sat at dinners and had people tell me and show me scars where a tumor has fallen off from taking immunity. I've had a guy ask me why he was telling me he had these little, they're called fatty cysts. Sometimes you get them on your arms or something. He had them all over his back. He goes, now you tell me, why did they go away after 10 years from taking immunity? I took it for a month, and my wife goes, have you seen your back lately? I said, no. She goes, and they were all gone. And he had like 8 of them or something, and it's just immune system function. It's just little things that people would not relate to taking a health product, and they certainly weren't taking it for that. But I've seen so many things like that. It's hard to even categorize all of them.
What would you consider the staples of the Nikken nutritional line? I mean, we know we're going to be sleeping on the bed, we're going to be drinking the water, we're going to be breathing the air, we're going to use the light. What would you say in terms of their nutritional support, that ongoing, creating an environment for your body is one thing, but you need to nurture that body. It's not a one-time exercise, it's an ongoing thing. So what do you think are the real staples of the Nikken nutritionals? Like, I'm hearing you say the immunity enough times that I know, maybe instead of just carrying a bottle with me and having it in case, I think I should probably add it as a daily consumption.
Well, when you look at just basic nutrition and just assume that everybody's kind of healthy, well, progesterol, I think, because today heart disease is the #1 killer of everyone, and everybody's working on heart disease as far as getting it. If they're over 30, they're starting to get heart disease. They now know that it shows up in your teens, right? So you should just go on a month or 2 of taking it twice a day, and then just end up taking it once a day. Jade green zymes, Ciaga, progesterol are kind of like common, really good for you things. Everybody should have some type of multivitamin in their system, and that's just a baseline of nutrition. And then you get into what is particularly well for your stage of life or what you have going on. If your skeletal system is a issue with you, everybody should probably have a little calcium in the osteodents. I mean, that's a product that I hear incredible amount of testimonials from too, is osteodents, of people actually getting out of the danger zone with their osteoporosis. And so it just depends on where you're at in life and what your age is, but you got to look at somehow consolidating a nutrition program that you just stick with. It just becomes part of your routine every day, that you don't think about, you just always have it, and you work through those issues.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I just think that's a healthy outlook, is just get something that you're comfortable with and make it part of your daily issue, your daily.
It is.
And it's like anything. It's a habit, like any habit. And maybe if you have, I know that I find I'm more likely to use things if I have it with me. So maybe buying something to carry these things around with you as a daily, you fill your case up for the day or at night, or
right.
Or just having it on the kitchen counter, like, out of sight, out of mind. But if it's right there in front of you and it starts becoming a day, like, I notice the difference in my well-being. And by the way, I'm a huge consumer of progesterol and Ciaga and jade green zymes, all in one shot glass. In fact, it's not quite a shot glass. I use a regular glass, and about half of it is filled with the combination of the 3. I mean, I really consume that stuff because, if a little bit is good, I think a little more is better in this particular case. Anyway, I just want, we've got some time in this call, but I want to just give you kind of a chance to, instead of talking to me, there's people out there who are going to watch this on YouTube in the days, maybe years to come. if you could encapsulate maybe a message to them, your personal message to them within the context of the work that we're doing here with Nikken, what would your message to them be?
I would say that there's probably nothing more important that you could ever learn about or kind of make your hobby than human health, because we're not taught anything about our health as we grow up. No one takes the time to show us anything about your health. And right now, the way that the state of the world's in, with pollution and the things that are sprayed on food and all these different aspects that tear your health down, you have to raise your awareness about it on your own, because no one's going to teach the next generation unless it's you. Your kids aren't going to know anything about health unless you take the time now to establish that routine in their life. And this is what I ultimately love about the Nikken home, is that your kids grow up sleeping in a special type of bed. They will always like that type of bed because they've learned that it's beneficial to them and they use it all the time. They know that you have an air filter machine going on in your house. They know that they go out and they get water out of a waterfall because the stuff from the tap tastes terrible once they drink it for a while. All these things make an impression. I've probably talked to 10 kids. No, they're not kids anymore. They're like 20 years old. People in their early 20s who grew up with parents that were in Nikken for a long time, right? And they all said something to me which was very fascinating, and that is that they all said, I'll take vitamins for the rest of my life, because they were always on the kitchen counter next to the toaster. And my parents took them all the time, and they always gave us something with breakfast. So I just think, I got to be paying attention to my health. So they're always in the habit, and they will for the rest of their life because someone showed them that, right? And that's the thing that our generation has the responsibility to do, is to train or teach our kids and their kids, our grandkids, that health is something that you make an effort to have. It's not something that just happens, out of nowhere. It's something usually that you make an effort to eat better, to sleep, drink clean water, take a few supplements. It's just part of your lifestyle. And so that's the main thing. And one of the reasons why I love teaching is that showing people how profound simple nutrients and simple programs can be to changing their life and their enjoyment of life.
Roger, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I could spend hours talking to you. You're really easy to talk with, and you've got a great energy about you. I think the work that you're doing is so suited to you, and we're so happy that you're with us in Nikken and spreading this message around, because really I couldn't have asked for anyone better to do it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.